Hi, everyone. One of the biggest leadership shifts I experienced over time was realizing that leadership eventually becomes less about your own success and more about your ability to help others grow. Because leadership alone is not enough. Eventually, leadership must translate into something deeper: empowerment. And over the years, I've come to realize that empowerment is one of the biggest differentiators between leaders and organizations that create temporary success versus those that create lasting impact. At its core, empowerment is not simply delegation. Don't make that mistake. Empowerment is about helping people believe they are capable of contributing beyond what they currently think is possible. Early in my career, like many ambitious professionals, I focus heavily on delivering outcomes, proving my capability, developing my expertise, and advancing professionally. Fortunately, I realized something more important. That is, individual success eventually becomes limiting if leadership does not also create space for others to grow. After several years of becoming a people manager, I slowly realized that leadership becomes less about your own contribution and more about your ability to build, empower, and develop others. At some point, I started asking myself a different question: how do I create more leaders around me instead of becoming the center of everything myself? That reflection eventually led me to adopt a principle that I still practice today. Whenever I step into a new role or lead a new team, I intentionally ask my team, who among you would like me to help prepare to potentially replace me within the next 18 to 36 months or earlier? And for those willing to take on the challenge, I consciously work with them to create development plans, exposure opportunities, leadership experiences, and growth contributions. Over time, I also encourage my direct reports to do the same for their own teams. Interestingly, this approach consistently created stronger succession pipelines and more empowered teams. In many leadership roles, I eventually had one or two strong potential successors prepared within a relatively short period because development and empowerment became intentional rather than accidental. And personally, this also allowed me to continue growing myself. Because when strong people are empowered around you, leadership stops becoming about controlling everything personally. Rather, you begin creating space for broader contribution, stronger teams, and sustainable growth beyond yourself. One moment that stayed with me recently was when a member of my team who had just received a promotion and new role thanked me personally and said, I felt confident applying because you had already been preparing me for bigger responsibilities long before this opportunity came. And honestly, moments like that eventually became more fulfilling than personal recognition alone. Because leadership may create results, but empowerment helps create future leaders too. I recently experienced another beautiful reminder of empowerment, this time outside the corporate world entirely. I had just come back from Birmingham after watching my son and his theater group perform at the European Junior Theatre Festival. While watching the performance, something deeply stayed with me. In musical theater, not everyone is the main actor. Many are part of the ensemble. Some even portray things like trees, animals, or background elements within the story. And yet, despite that, every single role matters. What struck me most was how each child was still encouraged and empowered to give their best performance, regardless of the size of the role. The energy, confidence, and pride were visible across the entire cast, not only among the lead performers. And honestly, I found that deeply meaningful because it mirrors something important inside organizations too, which is not everyone will always hold the most visible role, but strong teams and organizations succeed when people feel their contribution matters, their role has meaning, no matter how small it is, and they are empowered to perform at their best, regardless of hierarchy or visibility. Because sometimes the strength of a production, a team, or an organization is not determined only by the stars at the center. It is determined by whether the entire ensemble or team feels empowered to contribute together. One transformation experience that strongly reinforced my belief in empowerment happened in my previous organization where I was hired to help establish a global shared services model. At the time, many of the company's global leaders had very limited experience with offshoring or global business services. And honestly, some of the assumptions and concerns raised during leadership discussions showed how underestimated certain talent markets were at the time. I still remember being asked questions such as whether professionals in my hub locations, like the Philippines or Poland, could support global operations effectively, whether people in those countries can communicate well and strong enough, and even whether the infrastructure and connectivity could reliably support a global operations. At the same time, despite the ambitious expectations placed on us, we were operating with very limited budgets, yet aggressive timelines. So my team and I decided to focus heavily on empowerment, capability building, and potential rather than simply existing experience. In fact, many of the people we brought into the organization initially started as interns. But instead of seeing them only as temporary support, we intentionally invested in developing them and helping them grow into larger responsibilities. And what happened over time was remarkable. In less than 2 years, the shared services organization became fully operational, scaled faster than expected, and delivered results even at lower cost than originally projected. Eventually, the same global leaders who were initially hesitant became more confident in expanding additional work and responsibility into our global shared services team. That experience reinforced something important. People and teams often become extraordinary when someone chooses to see potential instead of limitation. And sometimes empowerment begins by simply giving people opportunities that others may initially not believe they are capable of handling. Interestingly, research strongly supports this idea too. One study came from Gallup's workplace research, which consistently found that engaged employees significantly influence productivity, retention, customer experience, and long-term organizational performance. And one of the strongest drivers of engagement is whether people feel valued, trusted, developed, and connected to meaningful contribution. I also found strong alignment with Harvard Business Review research discussing how empowerment, autonomy, and psychological safety significantly influence creativity, motivation, and innovation inside organizations. At the personal level, empowerment requires humility, trust, courage, patience, and the willingness to help others grow. At a team level, empowerment creates ownership, confidence, collaboration, innovation, and resilience. And lastly, at an organizational level or company level, empowerment shapes culture, engagement, adaptability, leadership pipelines, and long-term sustainability. One thing I continue learning is this: empowerment is not about controlling less. In fact, it is about developing more people capable of creating impact. And perhaps one of the biggest leadership shifts people eventually need to make is this: it is moving from asking, "How do I succeed?" to asking, "How do I help others succeed too?" Because meaningful leadership is rarely measured only by personal achievement. It is often measured by how many people grow because of your leadership, by how many people became more confident because you believed in them, and how many future leaders were developed because someone chose to empower rather than control. That, for me, is empowerment. The third principle within the Alex principles. So please, empower, because organizations do not become stronger only when leaders become stronger. Rather, they become stronger when more people are empowered to lead, contribute, innovate, and grow together. Over the coming days, I'll continue exploring the final Alex principle, excel. I'll also begin sharing more reflections, tools, and practical frameworks around coaching and mentoring, developing future leaders, empowerment-driven transformation, and building organizations where people can sustainably grow and contribute. And if these conversations resonate with you or your organization, and you would like support in facilitating leadership empowerment, transformation discussion for yourself, your teams, or your bigger organization, feel free to reach out and connect. I also invite you to join the circle and continue the journey with us, because leadership may inspire growth, but empowerment helps growth multiply across people, teams, and organizations. Please click the link below and join the circle.